When I host fintech marketing events, one of the biggest complaints that I hear from marketers is leadership doesn't understand marketing. They don't give us the budget we need. Their expectations are similar to sales. They just don't get it. And I know it's a big frustration. I see it myself in the work that we do with marketers every day. So I thought for this episode, it would be interesting to hear the perspective of the CEO, the other side. Now, for this episode, this is not just any CEO. Patrick is an amazing person, and any marketer would be lucky to have him as a CEO, since he genuinely understands marketing, is patient, and just in general, an amazing person. But I thought it'd be interesting to have him on our podcast to go a bit deeper into how a CEO thinks about marketing and see what he has to say about how marketers, we, should communicate to the C-suite. A bit about Patrick. He was an early employee at Nuvei, the well-known Canadian payment company, and is now CEO at his own payment company, Fiska. Fiska is an integrated payment solution dedicated to helping SaaS platforms add electronic payment acceptance to their services. I should also mention that Fiska is also one of our clients, and we've enjoyed a really fantastic collaboration over the past few years. So it was really great to go a little bit deeper into their view on marketing in general. In this interview with Patrick, we cover how does he as a CEO think about marketing, what are the metrics he really cares about, how he evaluates a channel when he knows it's hard to calculate the ROI, and what does he wish more marketers understood about how CEOs make decisions. Enjoy the interview. You're listening to the Fintech Marketing Lab podcast. I'm Arminta from Mint Studios, a content marketing agency specialized in the fintech space. And this podcast is where we experiment, explore, and break down how fintech marketing actually works in practice. Each episode, I talk with top fintech marketers about what they're testing, what they're learning, and how they're pushing the boundaries of brand, strategy, and team building. With that, let's get into today's episode. Amazing. So one of the first questions I wanted to ask you is, I know that you were an early employee at Nuvei, and now, many years later, you run your own payment company. I'd be so curious to hear, what would you say has changed about the payments industry since you worked for Nuvei and now as a CEO, and how has that perspective changed from working at a payment company versus running your own payment company?
Well, I have to say, just industry-wise, everything's changed since I started in the early 2000s. So I've been in the industry for 25 or so years. Before the 2000s or late 90s, I would say there was a period of about 20, 30 years of really stagnation. Nothing's really evolved, no innovation in payments. Everyone was doing the same old. Everyone was using the same way of processing payments. And no one really thought about payments as something that needs to be improved or enhanced or optimized. And then I think innovation came along with the first .com boom, or some people may call it a bubble because it resulted in a market crash. But there was the emergence of new technologies, companies like eBay, for example, which changed consumer habits. And the emergence of e-commerce really forced payment companies to think about payments and how that is embedded within their customers or their users' ecosystem. So you no longer have a retail brick and mortar store where a good old brick of a terminal could sit on a counter and every single customer had their own credit card, physical card. There were now different ways of making a purchase. And so when you look at that .com boom, we saw the emergence of companies like eBay, which led to PayPal, which then eventually got bought by eBay. And I would say PayPal was one of the first disruptors in the payments industry, followed by Square in the 2009, 2010 years. That really changed the way how a payment is made. And we're starting to see a trend towards integrated payments within a software platform, rather than a standalone solution like the good old brick. And if you do a quick search online for the Zone payment terminal, that's been the same terminal that has existed for 20, 30 years. It's been sitting on the same business counter, store counter for the 20, 30 years. And so what integrated payments has done is change the way people think about payments and how that's processed. So the traditional concept of having a physical card and swiping that through a terminal is no longer viable. And people were thinking about frictionless payments in different types of environments. A great example of that is Uber. In the past, when you take a cab, number one, I'll just remove the cab hailing experience for now and focus on the payment experience. With Uber, you hail a cab or your rideshare car, you get to destination and you literally just walk out. But before that, you hail a cab, you get to destination, and then there was this whole process of payments, right? If you pay by cash, the driver had to calculate the fare and then pull out cash, calculate the change, exchange of like physical funds and so on. That could take multiple minutes. And it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it's sometimes even worse if you pay by credit card because they would have to pull out their old payment terminal and then boot that thing up. That could take another couple of minutes to process a payment while blocking traffic and everyone behind you is honking because you're blocking traffic and trying to make a payment, or you're running late and you're just fumbling with cash or credit card to make a payment, right? And so that's the idea of frictionless payment. Uber's done that really well and made payments a behind the scenes event rather than a front of a house event. And so I'd say, to answer your question, everything's changed in the last 25 years. And there's such a quick pace of innovation within the payments industry, especially compared to the previous 25 years. It's sometimes hard to keep up with.
Nice. Oh my God. And also like working for a payment company is different to being the CEO of a payment company. What have you noticed, or what did you maybe not expect would it be like to be CEO? Like, how are you feeling about it in that position?
I see myself more as an entrepreneur than a traditional CEO. I'm not a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and I'm sure that the role of the CEO of a Fortune 500 company is very different. So I'll just speak from my perspective and from my experience. Being an entrepreneur means that you have to wear multiple hats. That's number one. You have responsibility over all aspects of the business. And you go from being the vision behind the business to the person that ultimately has to take care of sales, marketing, product, and so on, right? Even though you have leads in every one of those areas, or some companies have leads in each one of those areas, at the end of the day, when you're an entrepreneur, it all stops with you. So you have the opportunity and also the responsibility, or some people may see it as a burden, to have to look at the business in a very holistic way, right? Not just one aspect of a business. I think that's a big change. Although with Nive, I've had the opportunity to work in a very entrepreneurial environment. Even though it got very big, I was able to exercise a lot of creativity and so on and so on. But the role there towards the end became a lot more of a more traditional executive role or administrator than someone who's building. And so the biggest change for me now is going back and really building every single stone in that foundation around the company.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's very different. So the reason I asked you to join me on this podcast episode, and what I think is really exciting for our listeners, is the perspective of the leader when it comes to marketing. Because I think as marketers, we're often very entrenched in our own KPIs and our own goals. And I think a big kind of, whenever we do our fintech marketing events, one of the big topics is always talking about marketing to leadership. How do we do that? How do we do that in the best way? So I think this episode is kind of an opportunity to hear the other side, to hear yourself as a leader. How do you think about it? What is it that you want to hear from marketers? What do you wish marketers understood about your perspective? So let's just starting with Fiska a little bit. How do you think about marketing at Fiska? And then we can talk a little bit about like, how would you like marketers to communicate or all that kind of stuff. So how do you think about marketing at Fiska?
I think generally I'm very much of a meat and potatoes kind of guy, not in the sense of my diet, but really just in terms of my overall approach towards business, right? So I look at things in a very pragmatic way. So if we talk about marketing, I don't romanticize marketing like an episode of Mad Men, even though you probably didn't know this about me, but I'm a marketing major.
No way. I did not know that. That is crazy.
So
that's funny.
So for me, marketing is part of a sales process, right? It goes hand in hand with sales. And you've probably noticed that I'm using the term sales rather than the more current term of growth, and that's more favored by the tech industry. So it just shows you what kind of a person I am. But I think marketing is a critical part of a sales cycle. I think it falls within a sales function, which ultimately leads to customer or user acquisition, depending on how you view the industry. So customer acquisition and revenue growth, right? But marketing as itself is also a very broad term. And so if I had to define marketing in my own words or in my own view, it would include essentially three things. You have branding, you have product positioning, which is product marketing, and then communication. So what that means, if you combine those three elements, marketing should help create awareness for your company. So that's part of the branding piece for your products, which is product marketing. And product marketing is also product positioning. You have to be able to create awareness for your brand, but also be able to clearly communicate the value of your product or services, which is part of product marketing, to your customers. And the last part is communication. So communication could include several channels. How do you talk to your customers? How do you reach them? In which way do you reach them? What do you say? And so on and so on. So that's part of the communication piece. And then obviously you have other factors in there, and marketing is identify your customer or your target audience and customer persona and so on. So that's how I see marketing at Fiska, or in my own little world.
And I know that obviously like marketing is still a small part of what you do at Fiska, and like you're more focused on the sales aspect. What would you say at the stage that you're at Fiska? What are the metrics that you're looking at when you're evaluating marketing performance? And I think for the listeners, just so that they're aware a little bit, and you tell me if I'm right, but Fiska, the main way that you are doing your marketing is through LinkedIn, through website content, through LLM kind of optimization, but it's mainly website kind of content. That's how you're really mostly doing marketing. And obviously we're helping with that, but you're not doing like, I don't know, out of home ads and stuff like that. It's mainly website and digital marketing.
That's correct. And by the way, you're doing more than help. I think you're doing an amazing job with our marketing strategy. You've been a great partner.
Appreciate it.
To answer your question, I come back to what I had said earlier. I'm a meat and potatoes kind of guy. So the metrics that most important to me is conversion and revenue. So it ties down to customer acquisition and then revenue metrics. I think other very important metrics that are leading indicators, and I think they're equally important to know and understand. I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that I have so much information, so many decisions to make. And marketing is a piece. I'm not going to rank it in terms of importance or how much time I spend on it versus other tasks, but it's just one of the many areas that I have to oversee. And so for me, marketing, if I have to boil it down, is all about customer acquisition and revenue metrics or customer conversion.
Yeah. No, and I think this is where like sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect between leadership and marketers, where often they maybe are tracking metrics that aren't really connected, not directly to revenue. And so sometimes that's why often marketing is seen as the, I don't know, what do they call it? Finger painting in this department, because a lot of people don't see the value. And this is, what frustrates me sometimes, because it's like, especially nowadays in 2026, you need marketing, especially if you're a tech company, to raise awareness and to appear in the right places. But the problem is that if you're not connecting it to the right metrics, people just don't understand that. People don't see the value. What are some examples of metrics that you feel maybe marketers obsess over that you just feel, as you said, is just too much and you don't think is that relevant?
It's the first time I hear that expression, finger painting, but I completely actually see the value of marketing as a function, marketing as a science or a business science. And some people might debate the term science or the choice of word. Maybe it's not the best one, but it's definitely a business function. What I'll say is that there are a lot of metrics out there in marketing, right? So, and in fact, I think they're all important. It's just a question of time and priorities. So if I have 5 hours a week to dedicate on X, Y, and Z, what's important for me? What's important for me is your conversion metrics, your revenue metrics, your ROI metrics, right? But you have other metrics like awareness and reach. For example, it's impressions, website traffic, keyword rankings, or engagement metrics, click to, likes, blah, 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 or bounce rates and others that are important. They're leading indicators without those, and if you don't track those, then you are not able to optimize your customer acquisition or conversion, and eventually your revenue or your return on investment, right? So I think it's important for marketers to keep track of all those metrics. It may not be super useful to present all of them to your client. So for me, what's important is really conversion and revenue, or customer acquisition and revenue. And the rest is one of those things where I will look at them if I have the time. But I would rather take a look first or hear first about your conversion and how the campaign is doing.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think this is maybe what's missing, is that sometimes marketers only report on the leading indicators when really what you really want is the conversion, the revenue. And it's not to say that you shouldn't report on the leading indicators. It's just that don't just report on that. Like, let's do both. And if there's no time, do the revenue. But that, I think what's sometimes missing is the revenue aspect. Like, how does this help with acquisition, right?
Correct. And I would even say that even if you report on that first.
Yeah, start with the revenue or the customers.
Yeah, exactly. Again, if you had an hour a week with your client, how do you spend that hour? What do you talk about? Well, I think that's what you need to talk about first. And then go back on how you got to that point and maybe challenges that you may have, but don't spend the first 30 minutes talking about website traffic and, click-through rates, bounce rates, and then only use the last 10 minutes to go over your conversion and your revenue.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now say, imagine you had like the dream CMO. You had on your team like a top level, really one of the best in fintech. In this ideal scenario, what do you wish this person, how would they explain marketing to you? How would they report marketing to you? What is the dream scenario and how is that kind of relationship like? What are they talking to you about? What do they keep you in the know for?
That's a great question. So I think the CMO should be part of all business functions, because the CMO, if we look at that person's role, marketing could go very, very broad. And I think the CMO's role is probably slightly different from the one of an agency that is not part of inside of an entity. So the CMO has to understand, number one, your products and services, who your customers are, and actually touch all of them. That means they have to be able to talk to the customers. They have to be able to understand the customer's pain points and how we are able to provide value or address those pain points. So that, to me, a good CMO is one that is going to be able to talk to customers, talk to the competition, understand the market, understand the products, understand as much about the business as I do. Then their role is, in a practical way, in a day-to-day way, is to be able to take all that information and synthesize that in a way that is easier for someone who may not have as much involvement, whether that's a customer, an employee, or an investor, to convey the value that we provide as a company, as a product, as a solution. And it's important to also keep in mind that there is a company and a culture, not in an esoteric kind of kumbaya way, but customers not only buy your product or service, especially in our industry where trust is so important because you're handling people's money, that people make a purchasing decision on the company as well as the people that they work with. And so the CMO's role should be able to synthesize all that to the outside, to the inside, and investors, lenders, and so on and so on. And to go back to your question, what would I like to see reported back to me is the same thing that I would say to an external agency. Show me the end result first, and then we can talk about how we got to that point. And that's how generally I like to view data and metrics.
End result being revenue.
Yeah, customer conversion, revenue, and so on, right? So it could be, on the upside is customer acquisition revenue. On the downside could be customer attrition, and so on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how would you, for example, there are certain channels that are hard to attribute to new customers. And one example of this is LinkedIn, which we've worked on together. And we're all on the same page here. LinkedIn, it's incredibly hard to attribute to new customers. Even the date, like even a single LinkedIn post, that's not always going to perform well. And yet, this is a channel that you have decided to continue to invest in and clearly adds value. My first question would be, how do you understand LinkedIn and why do you believe it adds value? And then also, say the CMO has to report on channels like LinkedIn. How do you believe they should report on that?
So I think if we go back to the concept of attribution first, I believe that attribution is the biggest challenge for any marketer, whether you're an external agency or internal CMO. And I remember having a conversation a few years ago, and this is probably going back 10 years, 15 years ago, with a friend of mine who owns an out-of-home marketing agency that's doing super well and has massive customers. They're running super creative campaigns and so on and so on. But what he said to me is his single biggest pain point is to be able to show or demonstrate attribution to his clients. And so the message I have to all my peers, entrepreneurs, CEOs, leaders, whatever you want to call them, is not to necessarily obsess over attribution to any single channel. And so to look at marketing as a mix. And it's a mix of different channels, and that you need a mix to be successful. Now, in our case, LinkedIn is just one channel, right? I think that we are able to communicate to our clients through different channels, and LinkedIn is just one of those. And I don't necessarily try to put a quantifiable attribution to LinkedIn. I don't think that everything can be quantified or everything can be boiled down to a scientific unit of measurement that can be reliable. And so to make a long story short, I look at LinkedIn as part of a channel that we use to communicate the value to our customers. Now, why do I think LinkedIn is important in our case is that, as I alluded before, we have to build trust. How do you build trust with a potential customer who doesn't know who you are and that's looking for a solution or a financial service, to be more precise? And so we use LinkedIn as a way to communicate my own views. So I post under my own accounts, and so it's my own views of the industry, the products, and sometimes I'll even go into the personal life. Not that I also keep that at a very high level, but the point is people, customers, potential customers want to know not just about the product, but also about your views, your vision, who you are. And LinkedIn is a great way to do that. And I have often heard from our own customers and prospects I talk to comment on topics that I post on LinkedIn. They, I would say, generally agree. That's what led them to the conversations we have. I'm also guessing if they disagree, they wouldn't be talking to me. So it tends to be more biased towards the positive. But customers do comment. So it shows that, number one, they research what you have to say beyond what comes up on ChatGPT and Google and peer reviews. So they'll look up on LinkedIn and see what you say, and then they form an opinion based on that, right? So again, it's not a quantifiable scientific measure, but I think that LinkedIn is extremely useful for us in that way. It may not pull customers in directly. We don't really often see customers coming in straight from LinkedIn, but it's definitely part of the journey.
Yeah. No, I think a big reason potentially that you continue to invest in it and see the value is because you're the one who has heard customers say on a call, oh, I saw your LinkedIn post. And I think this is often maybe what's missing, or when you are the person who actually hears someone say, oh, I really like that LinkedIn post, you start to be like, okay, this is clearly worth it. And I completely agree with you. And this is why I continue to publish on LinkedIn is multiple people have mentioned that they appreciate the posts. And often it's someone that I met a year ago or 2 years ago, right? And I just understand that these things take time. And I think this is why marketers who are trying to maybe justify LinkedIn, it's maybe asking salespeople on the call to say, do you follow us on LinkedIn? Or how did you hear about us? I love the how did you hear about us? Because then that's when you actually hear the prospect saying, oh, LinkedIn. And that's what will, I think, get leadership's attention, is when an actual prospect or customer says, I loved your LinkedIn post. I loved your report. I love that event. That is like the biggest, and it's qualitative, right? As you said, there's no unit of measurement. It's kind of hard to track, but it's storytelling. And it's kind of, as a marketer, I think it's our job to kind of explain a little bit the journey that people go through and the role of each touch point, because ultimately that prospect probably read a LinkedIn post, read a blog post, did some research on ChatGPT, met you at an event. Ultimately, it's all these little bits. And I think if you're able to showcase that, that's when leadership understands, okay, this is how it's working. And this is why attribution is such a controversial topic, because yes, it's very hard to track. But the way I think about it is, even if it's very hard, doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? We should still try as much as we can to understand our customer and what they're doing, because that's how you know what topics to cover and also what channels to invest in. But yeah, basically I agree with you.
And I completely agree with you. And if we go back to the question of like what metrics to track and attribution and so on and so on, I used to obsess over a number of response or likes on LinkedIn and impressions. And I think the more I obsess over those metrics, the worse it got. And then there was a question of how do I break or how do I adhere to the LinkedIn algorithm so that I get more views? And yes, it's important to have a lot more views. That means that you're reaching more potential customers or a broader audience and your message can be heard and so on and so on, right? But it's also important to be authentic and true to your values, because that's really ultimately for the people that are reading your posts, that's what they want to see. They don't want to see like a sales pitch on every post. They don't want to see you provide or sway in the way the wind blows. So yeah, LinkedIn is a tricky one, but it seems to be working for us.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. The other thing I want to talk about is like just communication in general with marketers. Like, you're a fantastic person to work with. You are very respectful of people and a very great listener. But I know that a lot of marketers, they often struggle when communicating with leadership and they feel like maybe they're not being heard. And so I know this would never happen with you, but I think it's an important topic for people working with other leaders that may not understand marketing as well as you do and who may still feel like it needs to be justified a bit. So I guess my first question would be, what do you feel, what makes you immediately like lean in and get really interested when a marketer starts explaining an idea? What makes you really get fascinated by what a marketer is saying? What do you think is important when they're talking to you?
Well, I go back to trust, and how trust is built sometimes takes time. And trust is built two ways, right? I can't tell you how to do things and you can't tell me how to do things. It's about listening to each other as well. But I'll take a step back and maybe I can share with you my process there. So as I said, it starts with a relationship of trust. First thing here is I will vet if we share a common value and if our vision in general aligns. It's a lot easier for me to trust someone who shares the same value as I do and then general vision. It doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything and that we have to be just a copy or a mirror of each other. In fact, it's good that we have different views and opinions, but the core values have to be aligned. Secondly, domain expertise. So if you have domain expertise, that goes a very long way with me. Marketing is such a broad sector, a business sector. And if you're able to build expertise in my industry, right away, I would say that's 50% of the work that I have to do that's done in payments. But if we just talk about marketing in general, whether you're in SaaS or even more narrow, you could be a specialist in a certain SaaS segment. When we first met, very clearly you have developed a niche or an expertise or focus on the payments in fintech. And for me, that's uber important. I didn't need to teach you what the basic of payments are or interchange or who Visa and MasterCard is. So those are some of the factors that really make me lean in and listen. And then also it takes time. And so demonstrated results, trust. And I always say, and results take time. So again, maybe a word of advice to any of my peers that are listening is that you can't expect results immediately. You go to a doctor you have to trust what your doctor advises you. Otherwise, what's the point, right? And so you have to provide some level of trust from the get-go, but there's nothing like demonstrated value. So a lot of the questions you've asked was around metrics and what should be communicated and so on and so on. Show results first, as soon as you can, and focus on that, because ultimately that's what your customers are looking for. They're looking for results, and hopefully positive results. And even if it's not positive, talk about it right away. This didn't work. We tried this. It did not work. So here are the metrics, and here's how we're going to fix it. Versus going through the whole hoopla and skirt around the issues, right? So positive, negative, focus on results. And even if it's negative, or if it's not what we wanted, own it. That builds trust. I know that you are a responsible partner, and that good or bad, you will tell me. So I trust you, and whatever you say carries a lot more weight versus someone who's just skirting around the issue.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think you've nailed kind of what is the key part of communication with a marketer. Between a marketer and a leader is trust. And I think it's this balance, because we organize our fintech marketing events and we always hear the same kind of complaints, which is like leadership doesn't understand, leadership doesn't want to, is impatient, leadership doesn't give us the resources. And it's this balance. And I think it's also tricky because certain leaders maybe still think of marketing as of how it was in the 70s, which was mainly ads, or how it was before, but it's evolved so much. And in 2026, marketing looks so different, right? It's mostly, it depends on your industry, but I would say for fintech, it's mostly digital. And it's also taking up a bigger and bigger part of the funnel. So whereas sales used to do a lot more, reaching out, finding the leads, all of that, now marketing does a lot more because people want to do their own research. They're not wanting to get outbounded. So I think there's been this change in marketing, and maybe some leaders have not realized that. And so that's why there's often this tension between leaders and marketing. And I think just to go back to that, like you've already given some really good advice on how to build trust, which is alignment and also values and also demonstrating results. But in those first like 6 months, you've hired a new CMO, 6 months. Obviously, as you said, I don't think it's realistic to expect results super quickly. What advice would you give to a marketer that has 6 months to like build trust, basically?
Well, the first thing I would have to say is like a message to my peers that 6 months is a very short period of time. You can't expect results in 6 months, right? So no matter how, unless it's miracles, you're not going to build a whole marketing mix in 6 months and expect positive results. And I think we'll probably talking about positive results more than just general results, right? So marketing takes time, marketing takes patience. And I think it's, again, I go back to what I had said before, focus on results. Even if it's just you making incremental progress, you may not have reached the point that your customer or your leader is expecting. Show progress, show results so that they can have a little bit of something to chew on versus just keeping them in the dark. And again, the metrics may not mean a whole lot to them. Like what I call the leading indicator metrics may not mean a whole lot to them. Like the number of website visitors. At the end of the day, what does that mean in terms of revenue or customer acquisition? Not a whole lot, especially for someone who's not in it day to day. So show results, then you can backtrack into other metrics. And I think that's important to just provide constant communication and feedback loop to the leadership or to your client.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also, if they're not where they're supposed to be, explain what you're doing to improve that, I guess. Like, what is the plan? And I think One very good question, if there's a leader or CEO listening, one very good question that we've been asked often as an agency is like our opinion, which is like, considering at what month we're at, is this normal? Are we above average? Are we below average? Are we on track? Like, in your opinion, based on how many months we've been doing this, is this good or bad? And I think that's a really good question to ask, because then it's on the marketer to basically explain whether things are going well or not. If they're not, that's okay as well. But what's happening there. And if they are going well above the trend, the average, but the CEO thinks they're low, that's also important. So that the marketer can communicate and say, look, it's only been 3 months. but this is really good. So we're on track. So I think, as you say, over communicate, I think, and being honest and explaining, this is my opinion, this is what I've seen, is like ultimately what really builds trust, because the CEO needs to lean on the marketer's expertise really to know if things are working or not.
And you've just hit another very important point there. The measure of success, whether it's in terms of time or whatever the results may be, whatever metric you're using as a measure of success, really varies from company to company. And also based on the life cycle of a company. Like a startup is not the same as a scale up or a more mature business. So a lot of times, and this is where building expertise or vertical expertise or industry expertise becomes really helpful, is that you're, as a marketer, the leaders always want to compare themselves to their peers, to the competition, in other words, right? It's kind of a grade school report card. You got 90% in math, but are you doing that well or are you not doing that well? If the rest of the class, the average is 95% and you get 90%, 90% in isolation may seem like a great number or a grade, but you're 5% below your peers, right? And so as a marketer, it's always nice for your clients, or I'll speak for myself, to hear how we're doing, even though we may not have reached that goal yet. Are we progressing in a way that is kind of like on trend with the industry? And competitors? Are we doing better or not? And even if we haven't hit our goals, I can tell you right away, if you tell me that we're doing better than our peers, like to me, that's like a cause for celebration, right? So, and back to your point, I think communicate frequently, and especially in the early days, maybe over communicate, and that's going to help you build that level of trust.
Yeah, this is great. So I'd like to finish off with one last question, because I think this is also great for our listeners to hear your perspective on this, which is, what do you wish that marketers understood better of how CEOs make decisions?
So that one I can answer very succinctly. Marketing is important, and it may be your life, but it may not even be in the top 5 or top 10 of things to do or priorities for a CEO or an entrepreneur. So just keep that in mind. What's really important to you may not be the most pressing thing for them. So keep things simple, short, concise. We said before, communicate often and early doesn't not necessarily mean you just ramble on. Focus on the key data or information that's important to them, and keep things simple. They are not marketers. They are essentially entrepreneurs or leaders, and that have to lead many teams. So keep that in mind.
No, I think that's really, that's completely been our experience as well as an agency, and we always keep it in mind as well. And I think a few tricks that I've heard from other people that have worked is having a dashboard that the CEO or leader can always click on and see the immediate results. So you don't have that, like, they have to message the marketer every single time they have a question. I think just having something that has always the high level, the most important key metrics there, that's super helpful. And also, it could be a one-way communication channel in the sense that maybe every few days you send an update, or every week or whatever it is. And the CEO leader doesn't even have to respond. It's just, okay, cool, good to know. And I think there's a few different ways that you can communicate all the important stuff without taking up time, because exactly as you said, the CEO's job is literally running the company, and there's many other things that often have to take priority. So,
and by the way, sometimes you don't even realize it. Maybe you're on phone or in-person meeting with the CEO, but there's time and there's also mental bandwidth, right? So sometimes you say things, it goes in one ear, it goes out the other. They're still listening to you, they're nodding, they're smiling, but it might not register. So make sure that you understand the priorities in their lives and formulate your communication to them. At the end of the day, they're your customers.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. No, this is great. Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Patrick, for your time. I think this was really helpful. I hope that marketers listening understand a bit better the perspective of the CEO. And I really appreciate your time. And hopefully we can also implement some of those as well more at
thank
our
you
own agency.
for allowing me to share my thoughts and opinion on this.
Oh, my pleasure. Amazing.
It was fun.
Speak soon.
Thank you. Bye.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thanks for listening. You can find show notes and information about guests at www.mintcopywritingstudios.com/podcast. And finally, huge thanks to orama.tv for producing this podcast. Thanks for listening and see you at the next episode.